Hey guys. All right, so today we are going to do Eco 4 notes. That is on page 6 in your notes, so go ahead and flip there. This is about something called population limiting factors, but just like yesterday, first you need to do your warm-up. So these 4 questions are your warm-up. Go ahead and jot them down, write the answer, and then we'll go over the answers. All right. Number 1, what is an example of parasitism? You could have lots of answers here. You could say a tick on a dog. You could say a flea on a cat. You could say a tapeworm in a person's digestive system. You could say an aphid on a plant, those little things that the ladybugs eat. Those are parasites. So lots of examples of parasitism, but again, in parasitism, it's a symbiotic relationship where one organism is benefiting and one organism, the host, is getting harmed. Number 2, what is a community? We talked about this in the very beginning intro to ecosystems notes. A community is when we have a bunch of little bunnies and a bunch of birds and a bunch of deer and the trees and the flowers and the grass all living together. So it's a bunch of different groups of different species living together in an ecosystem. That is a community. Number 3, how do predator-prey populations impact one another? You did this yesterday where that little snowshoe hare and lynx graph. Basically, as the prey population goes up, the predator population will also go up. And then as the prey population goes down, because all the predators are eating them, then the predator population also will go down shortly after. And then lastly, number 4, what is commensalism? Commensalism is another symbiotic relationship we talked about yesterday. It is the one where we have one organism benefiting and the other is not benefiting, but it's also not being harmed. So examples of that would be like the remora and the shark. So the shark that had that little fish underneath it attached to it, the shark is not being hurt by the fish, but it's also not getting anything out of that relationship. The remora, the little fish, is getting all the little snacks that the shark is leaving behind, so it's benefiting, it's getting something to eat. Also, there are some birds called egrets that live around cattle. That's another example of commensalism, where the cows are not being hurt by these birds, but they're also not being helped by the birds. But the birds are benefiting because when the cows walk through the pasture, they stir up all the little insects and stuff, and the birds have a feast with all those little insects. So again, another example of a symbiotic relationship. So today, however, we're going to talk about Eco 4 population limiting factors. All right, so what is population density? Population density is the number of individuals in a specific area. The map on the screen is showing you some little points. They look like little mountains. That's showing you areas that have a really high population density, a lot of people living in an area. If you look like right here, all right, that's New York City. Lots and lots of people in a little area. All of these little mountain-looking things, all right, those are areas, cities, where lots and lots of people. Look over here in California, right? Lots and lots of people are living. If they are relatively flat, it means there is a low population density, not a lot of people in that area. Population limiting factors. So the first kind of limiting factor is called density independent limiting factor. It reduces the size of all populations in an area regardless of the population size. So it does not matter how many little bunnies are living in the forest. If it's a lot of bunnies or only 3 bunnies, if there's a forest fire and it comes through, it's going to hurt that population, all right? It doesn't matter if there's a lot of them or just a few of them. A density independent limiting factor means it does not matter how big the population of organisms is, whatever is happening is going to affect them. Density independent factors include abiotic factors. Remember, an abiotic factor is something that is not alive. Things like temperature. It doesn't matter if we have a lot of bugs or a little bit of bugs living in a certain area, the temperature can affect them. The amount of precipitation, example, floods. It doesn't matter whether you have 3 people living on a street or you have 100 people living on a street. If there is a big flood and it looks like the picture where all the houses are flooded out, there's water everywhere, it's going to affect the population. It's going to affect all the people, whether there's 3 or 1,000. Again, sunlight. Sunlight's important. It doesn't matter whether there's 2 dandelions or 700 dandelions. If there is or is not enough sun, it's going to affect the population living there. Other density independent factors where it does not matter what the population size is, human activities affect these things, like pollution and deforestation. So it doesn't matter how many seagulls and how many fishies live on this beach, or little sand crabs or whatever. If the beach looks like the picture and it's super polluted, then that's going to affect that population. Deforestation means cutting down trees and stuff. Again, does not matter if there's 5 bunnies or 100 bunnies living in the forest. If you cut down their habitat and they have no shelter and they don't have food for some reason, it's going to affect that population. Does not matter how big the population is. Natural disasters, as I mentioned, a forest fire, all right? Whether that is a forest that has tons of creatures in it or not very many, if a fire comes through and destroys the whole ecosystem and the whole habitat, then it's going to affect all of the organisms that live there. It won't affect a smaller population more than a larger, or vice versa. Earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, flooding, any of those kinds of natural disasters, a volcano erupting, are going to affect the population, and it doesn't matter whether it's big or whether it's a small population. The opposite of that is density-dependent limiting factors. They do depend on the population size. They will have an impact when the population is large and dense. So density-dependent limiting factors affect how many organisms can live in an area, but it's usually worst case scenario when there's lots of people or lots of organisms in a very small area. Some examples of that. Competition. If there is a huge population and everybody is competing for food, for water, for shelter, for space, the basic needs of all living things, that is going to affect the population size. If there's not enough food for all of the organisms, somebody's going to die. If there is not enough water, shelter, space for all of the organisms, then either those organisms need to move out of that ecosystem and find a new place to live, or they are going to die. Again, the larger the population, the more of an effect there is. If there's only 3 bunnies fighting for food versus 300 bunnies fighting for food, the larger population is going to be more affected. Another example is predation, the predator-prey stuff like we talked about yesterday. As the prey population increases, the predator population increases. So more bunnies to eat equals more wolves to eat them. Once the predator population increases, lots and lots of wolves, well, then the prey population, the bunnies, are going to start going down because they're being eaten up. Soon after that, the predator population, the wolves or the lynx, whatever's eating those rabbits, is also going to go down because their food supply goes down. Parasitism, and there's that cool fish with the little worm that eats its tongue that we saw during our microbiology unit. That's the colored picture I was talking about, so you can see more what's happening. But anyway, parasitism. Again, parasites can harm or kill the host organism. And also they can change their behavior, making them susceptible to predators. What that means is, for example, this fish with the worm for a tongue. This worm has literally eaten the fish's tongue, okay? When the fish goes to find food, this worm is a parasite and it's getting all the food. It's eating it up, and the fish is essentially starving to death, even though it thinks it's eating food. What's going to happen? What happens to you when you are super hungry in second block or whatever class you're in? You know it's close to lunchtime, no matter what the teacher is saying, no matter what the teacher is doing, all you can think about is how hungry you are, all right? It affects your behavior, your ability to focus on your surroundings and things going on. Same thing happens for real things in ecosystems like fish. That fish is starving. All it can think about is food, food, food. It's focusing on find food, and it's not paying attention to its surroundings, and a predator could easily come along and eat up that fish because it's not paying attention. Disease is a big issue in large populations. We know #1 spread of disease is through contact with an infected person or infected organism. When there's lots of people in close quarters, right, big population in a small area, that disease is going to spread very, very quickly through lots and lots of people. So in cities or in hospitals or in any kind of area where we've got a lot of people, office buildings, we've got lots of people in small quarters, those people or organisms are going to be affected by the disease. This disease is going to spread rapidly and the population is going to go down. All right, let me get back to this other slide. Here we go. Okay, so just as kind of a recap of what we talked about today, population limiting factors. In any kind of ecosystem, there are populations of different organisms. They live together. Different things in the environment can affect, and different kinds of processes can affect those populations. We classify them in two ways. There are density independent factors, things that don't matter how big that population is, it's going to affect everybody or every living thing in that environment. Those things are abiotic factors like the temperature, the precipitation, human activities, pollution, deforestation, and natural disasters like fires and earthquakes. Okay, it doesn't matter what size the population is, these things are going to affect the numbers of the population no matter what. The other area is then the density dependent factors. Those are things that affect big populations that live in close quarters the most. Things like competition. The more animals or organisms or people that are in competition for their basic needs, the bigger problems that you have. We have predation, their predator-prey stuff. We talked about how when the prey population goes up, the predator population also goes up. But then when the predator population goes up, so the prey population ends up going down because all the little bunnies are getting eaten. Parasitism affects organisms because parasites can travel from one organism to another. And then also disease, because we talked about that all last unit. Lots of people or lots of organisms being close together is how infectious diseases spread very rapidly. What I need you to do now is at the bottom of page 6, there's a classification activity. There are 12 different scenarios. Read those, classify them as either density independent or density dependent. Use your notes to help you. Remember, if it's talking about competition, predation, parasitism, or disease, any of those things are going to be density dependent. If it's talking about forest fires, temperature, human activities like pollution, deforestation, those things are going to be density independent. All right? Good luck with that. Be good. See you tomorrow.